standing on the lip of the falls, sitting in the jacuzzi, pouncing on salmon in the far pool, chasing salmon downstream, stealing fish from a more skilled angler, diving for an otherwise inaccessible salmon, and scavenging carcasses. Bears display all these techniques and more in their effort to sate their tremendous hunger. This is Mike Fitz, your resident naturalist with Explore.org, the world's largest live nature cam network. Welcome to this live chat about bear fishing styles and how bears make a living at Brooks River. Joining me today is Naomi Boak, park ranger with Katmai National Park. Naomi, it's always great to speak with you, and thanks for lending your expertise on this topic today.
Happy to be here. It's a typical Brooks day, cloudy and a little cool, but lots of bears, lots of fish, and we're here to talk about those too.
And before we get too deep into that topic, I do want to take a moment to remind our viewers to take the Bearcam Viewers Survey. You can find a link to that in the featured comment below the live camera or feed on the live chat channel on Explore.org. We're very interested, and I am specifically very interested in knowing a bit more about your Bearcam viewing experience and how it relates to wildlife conservation. So please, if you can take a few moments for that, that would be absolutely wonderful. But Naomi, if a bear is anything, it is hungry. And bears experience hunger in different ways than people. We all experience hunger pangs. However, bears must eat a year's worth of food in less than half a year to gain the fat reserves necessary for them to survive through winter hibernation. And that fact alone defines much of their summertime existence. So how does it influence the presence of bears at Brooks River and how they make a living there?
Well, the bears are here for one reason: the salmon. Their job, and they look at it like a job, is to get as fat as possible before they hibernate, because they've got to pack on the pounds before they hibernate, and also when they come out of hibernation, there's not a lot of food, so they've got to eat for an entire year in half a year. So bears are pretty strategic animals. We don't think about them in that way, but I'm talking about them a little bit in business terms. They're strategic thinkers. They want to fish efficiently, and if you come to Brooks Falls, that's a great place to fish efficiently. And they could, you could be the Warren Buffett of salmon fishing at Brooks Falls if you are smart enough and have figured out the economics of fishing for you. So, Mike, explain a little bit about the economics of fishing for salmon here at Brooks Falls.
Yeah, bears are what I consider to be masters of energy economics. Again, and it's all in preparation for hibernation. They need to eat. They need to make a huge profit in calories so they can live off their savings during the wintertime season when they're not eating anything and they're not drinking anything. So everything that they need to survive inside of their den, except for oxygen, needs to be contained within their bodies. And bears are omnivores. They subsist on a wide variety of foods. In fact, in any given ecosystem where bears and people inhabit, the diversity of a bear's diet probably rivals humans. In fact, they're overall better adapted at eating and digesting raw foods than people are. But they don't want to work any harder than they can to make a living. So in that way, they're also very much like humans. So they're trying to make that huge profit in calories before they go into the den. And in the Katmai region, they eat a lot of foods, but really no other food, as far as energy goes, compares with salmon. Salmon are their most abundant and reliable food source throughout much of Katmai, and the calories in salmon is really what they're after. When a salmon arrives at Brooks Falls at this time of the year, fresh from the ocean, it contains about 4,500 calories of digestible energy for the bear. So even an adult bear here, like we're watching Otis eating a fish, even an adult bear can can meet its daily energy needs by eating a couple of whole salmon. After that, it's just pure profit, and they can sequester that energy into fat reserves. Later on in the year, after the salmon spawn, they have fewer calories available to or contained within their bodies, but it's still a very valuable food source for bears. And bears can still make a lot of energy gains by scavenging those dead and dying fish. Bears also at this time of the year, and this is something that you're probably seeing a lot at the river, Naomi, and something that we're seeing a lot here, or when I'm watching the cameras, and that happens to be bears selecting for the fattiest parts of the fish. Each bite by a bear is a specific decision that it's making in order to maximize, again, its profit in calories. And they're like miners looking for the high grade ore in that respect. They don't want the waste rocks, or they don't want the lean protein necessarily. They certainly don't want the cartilage or the fish bones if they can avoid it, because those things really aren't providing them much of an energy reward. So really what they're looking for is the fattiest parts of the fish. In the salmon runs, going into Brooks River and the Naknek River watershed over the past couple of weeks have been very, very strong. And there's more fish on the way. So we're seeing bears high grading the fish, selecting the brains, the eggs especially, and also the skin, where the fat calories are contained in greater proportions than other parts of the fish. And each bear,
Yeah.
utilizes a unique suite of foraging decisions and techniques to help it make a living. Naomi, how can that suite of behaviors help us when we're trying to learn more about the individuality of each of these bears?
Well, it tells us a lot. I mean, I know a lot of cam viewers are always trying to identify bears, and a lot of visitors here are always asking me, who's that bear? And often I will be able to tell who that bear is by its fishing technique and where it fishes. So many things play into those decisions. Again, I come back to bears being strategic. They're placed in the hierarchy. Uh, how old they are. Subadults, they have to get what they can because they're not allowed to fish in all the prime spots. But for, I'll give you some examples. Bear 83 and Bear 755 Scaredy Bear. I can tell the identity of those bears frequently by where they fish in the far pool. Scaredy Bear sometimes looks a lot like Otis, and sometimes I have to take a second look. They both have floopy ears, and they have a light spot on the shoulder. But Scaredy fishes a little back further than than Otis does. And bears have fish on the lips, on the lip of the falls. Not all bears fish up there. So, Mike, what are the different techniques that bears use? We see them on the cams, and what kind of fishing techniques are there?
There's actually probably too many to cover, in brief, actually. So I think I'm going to kind of lump a bunch of them together overall. One of the ones that we see basically universally employed by bears is just searching for fish through the water, especially later in the season when they're scavenging for dead salmon, called snorkeling. So just like you see in the image here, they'll stick their faces in the water. For whatever reason, they don't like to get their ears wet most of the time, but they'll stick their faces in the water looking for anything that can't swim away. So searching like this through this snorkeling style is something that we see quite often later in the year. But bears are doing it right now too. So you'll see them walking through the water, occasionally sticking their face in the water, just trying to get a better look to see if there are any fish in the near vicinity. Probably
And
most
Mike,
often though, yeah,
I'm gonna add to that that right now you see bears doing that a lot in the lower river because bears at the falls are being particularly choosy, and they may nab a fish, injure it, and it then dies and comes downriver. Also, the water level is pretty low, so by snorkeling in the lower river, you can get be pretty profitable in your salmon fishing. Go ahead. I just wanted to mention that.
yeah. No, that's a good point because that's not something that we see every July. It depends on the water level. It depends on the run of salmon overall. Some years like this year when you have the combination of a lot of fish in the water and relatively low water levels, then that makes that snorkeling technique more worthwhile in July. In other years, if you have fewer fish and then you also have higher water levels, you're not going to have bears being able to make a living as easily in the lower river area, and they're going to be stacked up more at the falls than we're seeing this year. And I think towards the end of the chat, we have a question that we want to answer that kind of related to that. So if you're curious about how, the overall numbers of bears at the river and why we might see a lot of bears sometimes and few bears at other times, we're going to try to answer that just a little bit later on. But besides snorkeling, Naomi, there's also the wading techniques, and those are the techniques that we see most often, I think, employed at the falls. They're either standing somewhere or they're sitting somewhere, and they're waiting for fish to come to them. Especially, and fishing on the lip is probably the most, I guess, photogenic of the fishing styles. It can be a very successful strategy overall, but that's one of the most popular places for a few of the bears to make a living overall. Naomi, this year, which of the bears have you been seeing most often fishing the lip of Brooks Falls?
Well, of course, 775 Lefty, a fan favorite. When he first arrived, when he's hungry, and let's remember, hunger is, what drives these bears. He bobs his head a lot. And a few days later, no head bobbing. He was being so selective and so successful on the lip. Bear 812, a younger bear, is an older subadult, is pretty successful on the lip. We know that 128 Grazer does that, not as frequently when she's got cubs, because multitasking for a mom like that is a little tough. To be on the lip and make sure that the cubs that you've stashed away in a tree are okay. 634 Popeye loves to fish on the lip, and to me that's a little unusual because he's such a big bear, and you don't frequently see those big boars fishing on the lip. It's amazing to me that any bear can balance up there. I don't think you will see 856 or 747 on the lip trying to balance, although I did see Otis up there this year, which is a little unusual. And those big bears,
Yeah,
Mike, they tend to prefer places like the jacuzzi. You want to talk about that?
I do. But before I get to speaking about the jacuzzi, though, I do want to go back to fishing on the lip for a moment, because that is a when you're fishing the lip, that's a highly skilled position, and it is really fun to watch some of those younger bears, like this one, try to figure it out over time. But those fish are not small. Sockeye salmon weigh on average 4 to 8 pounds. So if you get like a 5 or 6 pound fish flying at your face and you're expected to catch it in your mouth, I mean, that's a difficult task. If you want to try to envision what that might be like for yourself, you just go to your pantry, pick out a 5 pound sack of flour, or if you don't have any, go next time you go to the grocery store, take a look at that. Imagine that being wrapped in fish oil and having someone throw that at your face, and you're expected to catch it with your mouth. That's what bears are doing on the falls. So the coordination and the skill involved in fishing the lip is something that I marvel at quite often. And then the more experienced bears like Grazer, Popeye, and Lefty up in the falls, I mean, in 402, I mean, they make it look really, really easy when they're up there. But the big bears that you were mentioning earlier, Naomi, bears like 747 and 856, it seems like they don't want to really stand very much to catch their meals. They want to be able to sit and do it.
Right.
And that's why we have 747 like in the jacuzzi, as you see in this image right here. The jacuzzi is one of those spots where bears can't really see the fish in the water. There's just too much air that's bubbling up due to the plunge pool and the water falling down over the falls. So they're using more of their reflexes and their sense of touch to wait for a fish to bump into them, and then they pin it to the ground using their big paws and claws or to their bodies, and then they can reach in with their muzzles and grab that fish that way. And really skilled bears in the jacuzzi, I mean, they can pick up dozens of fish a day fairly easily. A bear like 747, 856, I mean, you don't get to be as big as they are. These are bears that are pushing, if not exceeding, 1,000 pounds at this time of the year, especially 747. You don't get that big without being a very skilled angler in places that it's very easy to catch fish. Uh, but Naomi,
And
you've
think
been watching.
about Go ahead.
Go ahead.
But I think
No,
think
please go
about
ahead.
the energy expenditure there, right? I mean, they have the advantage of just sitting in one place and catching fish and not having to run around or use those muscles to poise themselves on the lip. So, and it takes half to be able um, to be in the jacuzzi and then just fish like that. But go ahead, you're going to ask me a question.
Yeah, and that's also another good point too. I've been in the jacuzzi a few times. At a time of the year, I will be clear to say when bears are not around or frequent the area, and it's legal to go down into Brooks Falls, and you have to have a lot of mass to hold your ground in the jacuzzi. The force of the water really wants to push you out there, at least for a person of my size. Uh, so for 747, he can sit there pretty easily, and you can see a lot of those younger bears fishing in the jacuzzi, and they're bobbing around quite a bit just because of the force of the
Yeah.
water. So 747 is not really expending any more energy than he would be if he was resting in the forest when he's in the jacuzzi. But I did want to ask you, you've mentioned that you've been watching a bear downstream of Brooks Falls in the Riffles area, sitting and waiting down there and actually making a living in that area. So that sit and wait technique the isn't restricted to the immediate area around the waterfall.
No, it's not. I am fascinated by Bear 151 Walker's behavior. He's a youngish adult, it's 11-ish. He's a smaller male, especially in June or July. And he knows that in a shootout with 747 or 856, he's going to lose. So rather than try and compete with those big guys at the falls, he has found a spot in the riffles where he stays. He did this last season. He seems to be doing it this season. And he fishes very successfully. It's an eddy, so it's like a mini jacuzzi. And the fish get caught in there, and he gets fish after fish after fish. And the only thing he has to do there is really defend it against subadults, which for a bear like 151 is pretty easy to do. Every once in a while, a female will come down there. But then I noticed last year, once 151 got really fat, he started fishing the lip. And to remind anyone or let people know how fat he got, our survey team did laser scans of 5 of our bears last year, and they estimated that 151's weight was the same as 32 Chunk's weight, and Chunk is one of our largest bears. So this guy makes a real profit. He is a very successful fish entrepreneur around here.
And those
So
standing and waiting techniques are employed most often by the large adult males that can dominate the best fishing spots up at Brooks Falls. But there are more active techniques that we'll see quite frequently, and those happen to be things like chasing fish throughout the water. In this clip here, I actually do like this clip. This is number 708 Amelia, just downstream of Brooks Falls. She's a bear that we don't see fishing at the falls all that much, especially when she has cubs, young cubs. This year she has yearlings, two fat yearlings, I might add. Amelia is a bear that I got to know fairly well during my first several years as a ranger at Brooks River. But she can charge into the water and target salmon with skill and efficiency. It does require a bit more energy than standing and waiting. But again, bears, if you can't dominate or gain access to those um, those places where the fish are going to come to you, you're going to have to try to utilize some other fishing techniques. And Amelia is really good at it. And I love watching her run through the water and catch those fish. Again, that's not a skill that I could replicate. I don't think nearly as much, no matter how much I practice. Next time people go swimming, I want everyone to try running through the water. I mean, it's difficult to do. When we see these bears doing it, they make it look easy, and that again demonstrates just how much strength they have and how much power they have. Even the younger bear, or not younger, but smaller bears like Amelia. Amelia is not necessarily a large female, but she's well filled in, and she does possess a lot of strength.
Mike, I have a question for you, and it's not in our notes. So how much of these
Okay.
fishing tech First is that I would like you to do a video of your trying that in the water. We've seen you
Okay.
in the jacuzzi. We've seen you in a den. I think it's now time for to see you try dash and grab.
Okay.
But besides that, so we see different fishing techniques. Younger bears, like subadults, doing what they can. Um, but how much of fishing techniques do bears learn from their mother or by observing other bears? How do they know how to fish?
I think it's a lot of both, honestly. Bears are very smart. They can put two and two together. We do see mother bears taking their cubs to the falls occasionally, like number 402, and and she'll fish the lip. So obviously, like a cub is paying attention to what mom's doing in that instance. But not all females will take their cubs to the falls. Yet we have, dozens of bears that will try to fish the falls area. And I mean, it's really just like a handful of times that I can remember seeing a female fish the jacuzzi, for instance, for any extended period of time. Uh, but bears eventually figure out how to do that. So I think it's not only that they see mom doing it, but they see other bears doing things and they want to replicate that technique for themselves. So they certainly possess the cognitive skills to be able to do that. And it's really fascinating to watch those younger bears try these different
Hmm.
techniques out, experiment with different techniques. They could be all over the place. They might try the far pool, they might try the lip, they might try the jacuzzi. And then once they grow into adults, they seem to kind of settle into a more focused routine like Otis and, and stay maybe more in the far pool or in the jacuzzi, but really some fascinating stuff. And then there's also a technique, Naomi, that we see occasionally, especially early in the salmon run, that is one that sometimes is hard for to accept. That happens to be stealing. Have you been seeing a lot of instances of fish stealing this year?
Mostly by cubs. Um,
Okay.
Cubs are trying to steal from mom a lot, and of course, when you're on a plane, you want the oxygen mask for you before you hand one to your kids. Uh, Sows with cubs want the fish for them before they'll hand it over to their kids. So I've seen a lot of that. Um, Not as much fish stealing because there's so many fish. Now, I see bears taking scraps, almost as much as the seagulls, because there's so many scraps. But this season, because we have so many salmon, I'm not seeing as much stealing as I usually do. But yes, it is a technique that young bears like particularly.
Yeah, its frequency really does depend on the availability of salmon. When there's a lot of salmon, there's really not a need to take that risk. That clip we saw was Lefty from a couple of years ago stealing a salmon off of Otis, and he doesn't have to do that this year because there's just so much fish available. So we see it most often when the availability of fish is a lot lower than what we have at Brooks River right now. It's a risky strategy, but it can be rewarding at times when there's not a lot of salmon available. And again, from a human perspective, it's like, oh, stealing, that's a terrible thing to do. But from a bear's perspective, that is a completely legitimate fishing technique. It is just as legitimate as standing on the lip of the falls and catching a fish. So again, an example of how bears make a living in multiple ways. And perhaps the most rare fishing technique that I have witnessed at Brooks River, one that we don't see very often, that happens to be diving. We don't see a lot of bears diving for fish. They just don't seem to want to work that hard for it, or they don't learn how to do it. It can be also very difficult for them to do it because they can be very fat, and you have a lot of energy fat reserves on you. You're more buoyant. It's hard to get down under the water. Occasionally, we'll see it down at the mouth of Brooks River. If 402 ventures into the jacuzzi, we'll see her diving in there, and that's pretty fun to watch as well. But that's one other quick one that I wanted to mention. That's a fairly rare uh, technique. But again, all of these different techniques are being utilized by bears so they can make a living and survive wintertime hibernation. Of course, Naomi, we also get questions quite frequently on how much salmon or how many salmon can a bear eat per day or per year. I think you wanted to speak about that example with Otis.
Yeah, well, Otis is the Zen, as many of us call him, the Zen master of fishing, and he spends the least amount of energy and probably gets more fish, more bang for the buck, right? He went to the right business school. Um, I have seen Otis eat 40 fish in a day, 40 salmon in a day, and it takes him a longer time to eat because he's missing two canines. So he really is a fishing bear to be admired. That's a lot of calories. I mean, Mike, would you estimate that could be upwards of 100,000 calories in a day?
Oh, more than that. If he's eating, the majority of the fish, for sure. Because again, each one of those salmon that are coming in the Brooks Falls right now are 4,500 calories. So, so yeah, eating 40 fish. I mean, that's just a incredible number of that. It's a number of calories that I can't fathom consuming over the course of a of a day. I mean, it's just not feasible for humans. Bears, though, again, they live and experience a world of hunger that's different than us. And then this is Otis right here in the far pool in September. So this will give you an example of what he'll probably look like in the fall, as he sequesters a lot of that body fat, and all of those calories he's taking in from salmon right now. And one other
Now, I
question that
think
we get.
that, okay,
Please go ahead.
go ahead. No, I was going to say that I think a lot of us rangers do the opposite of bears, is that we consume more calories when we're not here in the winter because the eating isn't so good for us here in Brooks Camp. So we have an opposite schedule from bears. But go ahead. You had one other question you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, along the lines of that question of how much salmon can a bear eat, we can take a look at what bears are doing at the falls, but it's a little bit harder to know what bears are doing throughout the year and how much salmon they're consuming throughout the year. The short answer is a lot, but I think the long answer is actually a bit more fun to consider. And there was a study done on bears on Kodiak Island, and it came out in 2013. It came out in the Canadian Journal of Zoology. It's titled "Salmon Consumption by Kodiak Brown Bears with Ecosystem Management Implications," and it's actually kind of interesting to read. The researchers collected hair samples from a variety of bears in a variety of ways, and they analyzed the mercury content in a bear's hair. And by knowing how much mercury is in a salmon's body, for instance, they could determine how much salmon a bear would need to eat to gain that much mercury in their hair. And mercury is a heavy metal; it's a toxin at high levels, or even small levels in many cases. But it's not known to be present in salmon that in any level that would cause toxicity. But still, that doesn't mean that it's not going to get into your body if you eat a salmon, for example. And it gets into the bodies of bears, and it's present in their fur. So the scientists were able to determine just how much salmon bears were eating over the course of the year. And to give you an idea of what the size of Kodiak bears are like, it's about equivalent, a little bit larger on average than what we have in Katmai, but very similar. So the average size of adult males that they got hairs from in the summertime on Kodiak Island was about 880 pounds. That's very much within the range of the average of adult males in Katmai in summertime. The females were about 660 pounds, so really big bears overall. And the total salmon consumption for adult males and this is an average. Keep in mind,
Drum
was
roll,
over
please.
6,000. Yeah, it was over 6,100 pounds. Females ate about half that though, so only about 3,000 pounds. I'm saying only, right? And then subadult bears about 1,300 pounds, and that's per bear per year. So each adult male consumed about twice the amount of salmon as an adult female. So the bigger bear you are, the more meat you have to have in your diet, and I think that's reflected in those statistics. One important thing that I want to mention about this study, though, is that there was a lot of variation. And if this deer fly would leave me alone, I can finish that thought. There's a lot of variation per individual. Some adult males ate as much as 10,000 pounds of salmon a year. Again, it's just not a number that I can fathom. Others, though, other adult males had a lot less salmon in their diet, maybe something around 2,000 pounds overall. So it varies considerably across individuals. Some subadult bears actually had very little salmon in their diet overall. And if the smaller the bear, the easier it is for the bear to make a living off of vegetation. You can eat that vegetation at a more efficient rate and digest it more efficiently based on your body size. So if the smaller the bear you are, the easier it is for you to make a living off of some of those alternative food resources. But if you're a big adult male, yeah, you got to eat a lot of salmon. And the population size on Kodiak Island for those bears is, and the density is roughly similar to Katmai. There's about 2,300 bears on the Kodiak archipelago. The total salmon consumption per year for those bears is about 8.2 million pounds. So just a lot of fish. It really does underscore the importance of salmon in the lives of the bears on Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. And fisheries managers know that
And
bears are eating a lot of salmon, so they ensure that they're letting a little bit of extra fish coming up into the watershed to account for that. They're accounting for those other biological needs of the ecosystem besides just the number of salmon necessary to sustain the run.
it speaks to both the success, speaks to the success of the ecosystem as a whole, and especially of the salmon and their life cycle and the bears here. And then I think there's one other factor that comes in here is that bears, where their main job, more than 9 to 5, is eating as many calories as they can. There are other things that they have to do. They want to mate. Those big dominant bears that are probably eating the biggest quantities of fish, they stop to go off and mate. We saw 856 distracted by 402. I don't think he was doing a lot of eating when he was pursuing her. So to think that they have those other things that they have to count in there, and it's just a phenomenal amount of salmon, just phenomenal. And the fact that we have that healthy ecosystem and water, and so that that many salmon can come through and spawn and create more salmon, and still the bears can eat that much fish a year. It's pretty astounding.
It really is amazing. Katmai, and I've said this before, I don't think I could say it enough. Really, Katmai is an ecosystem that's functioning at its full potential. There's enough salmon for bears. There's enough salmon for the commercial fishery. It's not like elsewhere where, people are bickering over the last bits of salmon and whether or not we can even give any salmon to wildlife. It's not like that in Bristol Bay. And I think that really does underscore the value of it and the need to protect really what is the last great salmon run left on Earth. One final topic I wanted to discuss with you, Naomi, before we get to our conclusion here is, overall bear activity at Brooks Falls, depending on, the amounts of salmon. Can you, because it's, again, another question that we get really often. And in fact, one of the questions that came in through our Ask Your Bear Cam question page, some person named B was asking, where are all the bears? We see lots of
Hmm.
fish, but bear numbers seem very low. And the image that you're seeing on the screen here, this is from 2009 or 2010, and there's easily a dozen bears in the image there. And I took this as standing on the platform at Brooks Falls. We're not seeing anything close to that at Brooks River White right now. Naomi, why are we seeing maybe fewer bears at the waterfall right now, even though there's just a lot of fish?
Well, I'm going to say two things about that. The other night I was at the falls, and there were 14 bears there, not counting cubs. So, but in the past, there have been many more bears. I mean, there were years when you'd see 20 bears or more at the falls. But I think because we have so much salmon, the bears don't have to spend as much time at the falls. So again, expenditure of energy. Why would you spend all that energy fishing when you've been able to fill up in a very short period of time? And it's the salmon runs for years have just been extraordinary. I think we count the number of salmon attempting to jump the falls, and their estimates, because you can't count that fast. We do it per minute. And last year, I remember a ranger telling me that she counted over 400 salmon attempting to jump the falls in 1 minute. I mean, that's a lot of food for those bears. So it seems to me you don't have to spend all your time out there when you've got all that food.
Yeah, we're just looking at an footage of Lefty live on the lip of Brooks Falls, and you can see how tubby he was. There are bears and other ecosystems that don't get that fat before they go into hibernation. So again, these bears have a lot of food available to them. And it's a fairly unique phenomenon in that way. There are not a lot of places, not a lot of ecosystems that provide this much food for brown bears overall. So across spatial scales, across like seasons, yeah, there are more bears at Brooks River when there are more salmon available. But on a day-to-day basis, it can vary quite a bit. And when there's a superabundance of salmon, like we've seen over the past week or so, like you said, Naomi, there's just not a lot of reasons for bears to spend a lot of times at the falls because they gain their fill very quickly. They don't have to spend a lot of time fishing there. So it's an interesting phenomenon. It's really fun to watch overall. It changes every day. That's one of the things that I love about watching the bears at Brooks Falls. It's really not the same scene. Changes from hour to hour and day to day, certainly from season to season. Um, and you know what? We have, I think, a couple of additional viewer questions we'll try to get to here. But before I do so, I just want to, again, thank you, Naomi, for joining me today on this live chat. It's always really fun to talk about bears and salmon with you.
Oh, it's fun, and I want to say before we get to the questions quickly, is that I am very grateful for the way this bear watching community came together as we were dealing with the death of the cub the other day. It was a difficult thing for all of us, a difficult thing for that cub's mother, but I think that what I've experienced before and I experienced again, this is a very can be a very empathetic community and caring community, and I just wanted to thank everyone for that.
Well said. I don't think I'm going to try to add anything to that. Well, with our, the variety of fishing techniques utilized by brown bears, I mean, it demonstrates, their adaptability, their ingenuity, and at the forefront of that effort, again, I want everyone to consider at the forefront of that effort is hunger, uh, and an urge to eat to gain the fat reserves necessary to survive hibernation. And hunger provides the motivation for these bears, but it's really their skill, their adaptability, uh, that provides the means for them to discover how to make a living at Brooks Falls. So it's watching their fishing styles highlights all of those things, and it's yet one more reason why watching bear cam is a fascinating experience. Naomi, do you have time to stick around for a couple of additional questions?
Sure, I've been going like this because people wanted to ask me questions, and I would love to ask you questions, but I'm doing a live broadcast. So enjoy. Okay, I'm here.
Okay. Now, we're going to be talking about wolves tomorrow. With um, tomorrow at 1. I was trying to think of the time. Yeah, it's 1 p.m. Eastern time. So please tune in to the live chat channel, and I'll be doing a live broadcast about the wolves that we've been seeing fishing at Brooks Falls. But I wanted to bring that up just briefly, Naomi, because we've been seeing actually this morning there were two wolves downstream of Brooks Falls scavenging fish. And a lot of those things that we relate to bears and different fishing techniques and the ways that they're trying to living is similar in gray wolves as well. So again, they're adaptable animals. They're also very smart animals, able to take advantage of opportunities when presented to themselves. And they're also, competing for some of the same resources as bears. But these couple of wolves, at least, have been able to come to find a niche at the falls. We don't know how long they're going to stick around, but it's been a really fascinating thing to see. And it's probably, happening a bit too early for you to see. It's been usually, around 5 a.m. Alaska time or so, but it's the morning for me on the East Coast, so I can sit on the cams and enjoy it. I don't know if you've had any opportunities to watch those wolves or not.
No, but next week we're doing a virtual summer camp with Shenandoah National Park, and I have to be up quite early, so maybe I'll catch it.
Okay. And one question again that came in through our Bear Camp question form was from Lori, and she was, and I think we talked a little bit about this during the chat, Naomi, but she says she's noticed a lot of bears eating dead and dying salmon in the lower river recently. So much so that it almost looks like or feels like a fall scene there, especially with the sows and the cubs and the subadults. And can you say, from what you see in the river, how did those salmon die? Is it that the salmon are just kind of dying, or are they being partially killed by a bear and those carcasses drifting downstream? Have you been able to see anything that would help to lend some insight into those questions?
Well, when I see the salmon coming in from the lake, from Naknek, they look substantially healthy. I'm not, they're looking large. I'm not seeing a lot of fungus or injuries on the salmon. So I don't, I'm not seeing something that would say injury. Um, but I am seeing a lot of bears at the falls being very fussy. I mean, Lefty the other day, he would bite into a salmon and it's like, oh dear, it's not a female. Boom. So I think there's a lot of that going on. I think that the falls is so crowded with salmon at times that I think that may hurt the salmon. I mean, the other day when I was there, it was wall to wall salmon, and some of the salmon were getting beached. So I suspect that there is some of that. The salmon crowding is hurting them, and then I think also because the water level seems to be lower downstream, and so that may affect the salmon, and certainly makes it easier for the bears to catch. What do you think?
Yeah, I think all of those are factors. It's the fact that there's partially eaten carcasses drifting downstream, the fact that bears are maybe unable to turn off their urge to catch salmon, even though they don't have the capacity in their stomachs. So when we're seeing bears like catching and releasing fish, I think that's part of it. They just have that instinct to catch vulnerable prey, and they can't turn it off very easily. So they just catch it and they say, "Oh, I just can't do it," and and they just let it go, and it drifts downstream. And that fish is probably unlikely to spawn, but another hungrier bear is probably going to find it fairly easily. Yeah, those partially eaten carcasses, the fact that some salmon probably do, injure themselves trying to jump the falls. They might knock themselves out, or stun themselves. Sometimes it's hard to see on the cameras, but you'll see occasionally a salmon just drifting out through the school of fish below the falls. And I think that's a salmon that just picked the wrong trajectory and just smacked against the waterfall and injured itself that way. So all of those things I think are definitely factors, and the source of the fish that a lot of those bears on the lower river are eating right now. And one final question that I have comes from Nancy, and she was wondering, why would a subadult bear walk through a fish boil and not try to catch one, and then move just to a different area to look for more fish? Maybe we should talk about what a fish boil is. It's not something that that you do on the beach there. You don't bury fish in the ground or have a big pot full of them. But what's a fish boil, Naomi?
Well, a fish boil is when there so many fish together that the water looks like it's boiling. It's boiling with a lot of fish. And you see that when the fish are gathering together, getting ready to swim upstream. You see it around the bridge. Um, and like I said the other night at the falls, it was boiling over with salmon. It was a lot of salmon, and they just couldn't move. So you see the water, um, you know, seem to boil up, bubble up.
And yeah, so the next part of that question, though, why would a bear walk through, just these boiling salmon all around them and not try to catch them? I mean, that's one of those motivational questions I really wish we could ask the bear. Is it not? Is it because you don't want to work that hard? Is it because you're not that hungry? Does would it actually be harder for you to catch a fish in that under those circumstances? So I don't.
Have we frozen? I think Mike is frozen, so I'm going to continue with that. So we really don't know why a bear might not try to catch salmon in all that boiling water. But the other day I did see it was so many salmon, it was so easy for those subadults to actually try and catch the fish in the boiling water. So the apparently boiling water. So yeah, there's so many questions we'd like to ask the bears. Um, you know, how does it feel to be pursued by 856 all the time? I'd love to ask 402 that. We just don't have that opportunity. Um, I'm just checking to see. Um, so we have lost Mike, and I let's see what the people at Explore are saying. We might sign off. Okay. So I'm going, since we have lost Mike, Maine technology seems to be worse than Brooks technology. So I want to thank Mike for chatting with me today. It's always fun to talk to Mike about bears and salmon and Brooks. And thank you for joining us. And you can continue to ask us questions in the chat. Tuesdays and Fridays, we go into the text of the chat and we try to answer your questions live. And stay with us and continue to watch the bears on the streaming cameras at explore.org. It's a great season. Thank you and goodbye from Brooks Camp.